Joining us now, Steve Cortes. Steve, Senior Strategic Advisor, Trump-Pence 2020. Steve, polls looking good, running in our favor. But I want to talk a little bit about COVID, Steve, with us right now, and this coming from the Health and Human Services testing guru, Admiral Gurur, today on the very encouraging virus trends in our country right now, but the fake news legacy media won't talk about it. What's going on,
That's
Steve?
Right. That's right, John. Thanks for having me. By the way, I'm so glad I was listening to you. I now know what I'm doing tonight from 6 to 8. I'm going to be listening to you and my friend Steve Bannon talk about this critical issue of the election. So thank you for doing that show. But yes, to get back to your question. Admiral, I believe it's pronounced Girard, is how you say it, right? But at
Girard.
Okay, Girard, gotcha. Admiral Girard, who is the HHS, you're exactly right, the testing czar, physician, of course. He was on with Jake Tapper on CNN, and he said this, and I think, obviously Tapper didn't want to hear it, and most people in media don't want to hear it and don't want to promote it, how good the trends are right now regarding the virus. And look, nobody's saying it's over. Nobody's saying we can signal the all clear. However, we should also recognize that the trends are right now very constructive, very optimistic, trending toward health. So to give you his exact stats that the Admiral cited, he said from the peaks in July, the number of cases down 40%. Number of ICU people in ICU down 62%. Number of deaths, not surprisingly given those other two stats, down almost 30%. So these are fantastic trends. The virus is trending the right way toward health in this country. Corporate media doesn't want to talk about that, so we have to, John, on shows like yours and people like me working for the campaign have to make sure that news gets out there, that again, we can't declare victory by any sense. However, the great news is, as a country, we are learning how to deal with this virus. We're learning how to protect the most vulnerable. We're learning how to mitigate risks. And our amazing doctors and nurses are learning very well how to treat those who do get infected. And our therapeutics are so much better than they were even just weeks or months ago. And, of course, we're very optimistic. We can't count on it yet, but we're very optimistic that the silver bullet, that a vaccine is in the offing. But I think we as a country need to celebrate that good news and know about it. I also believe, John, to connect this to the economy, the economic numbers lately, and that's really my focus. I spent 25 years on Wall Street before I got into this game of politics, and because of that, I pay a lot of attention to the economic data, and the economic data lately has been just astounding. And I think part of the reason why is it's very much related to the virus news. As the virus news improves, the economic news improves because people are more willing to go out, to purchase things, in terms of business owners, to hire somebody. We are smartly reopening. And you won't know that. I know you're in New York City. You won't know that if you're in Manhattan because it doesn't seem like it at all. It doesn't seem like it in Washington, D.C., where I am right now.
Right.
However, when you get away from these coastal cities and these lockdown cities, a lot of America is largely back, not entirely, but largely back to normal economically.
How do we get this message out that things are getting better? I mean, I've got Michael Patrick Leahy from Nashville coming up. Mayor Cooper there in Nashville hid the positive information from the public, hid it so that he can continue with the lockdowns and destroy people's lives. Like, who would do that? Why would you do that?
Isn't it incredible? I mean,
yes.
That's just, honestly, and I don't use this word much in politics, that's evil. I mean, that is outright evil, right? That's not just, a bad policy, or it's not, it is evil for you to say we are going to suppress information that we know that the bars and restaurants in Nashville, major industry there, right? It's such a big tourist town. We know that the bars and restaurants are not significant vectors for spreading the virus, but we're going to suppress the information so that we can keep them closed, so that we can keep the very people we're supposed to serve, the citizens of Nashville, so that we can keep them out of business and unemployed, and that we can make some of these business owners permanently out of business. I mean, I don't know another word for it than evil. Thank goodness that it's been revealed. Unfortunately, John, I don't think it's rare. In my hometown of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot, I think perhaps the worst mayor in America, although a lot of New Yorkers would probably argue with me that de Blasio is, and they have a case to make as well. But Lori Lightfoot, not only did she use the virus as a pretext to seize a lot of power, it really became about punishing people. For example, the Chicago lakefront, which is for listeners who've never been there, it's glorious. It's about 18 miles long.
Oh, it's beautiful.
One of the most beautiful waterfronts in the world, I would argue. A lot of people don't really realize that Chicago has a shore, essentially. It's almost an oceanfront. And it's expansive and beautiful, all of it public, all of it parkland. Lori Lightfoot closed the entire Chicago lakefront. You could not go for a walk or a bike ride by yourself. Now, that has nothing to do with the virus, right? that clearly it was not a virus transmission risk. It had everything to do with seizing power, controlling people's lives, and quite frankly, trying to make them miserable. Because unfortunately, that's where the left saw its avenue to political power, is that they could depress the country enough, economically and psychologically, they would defeat Donald Trump. Oh, and then places like Chicago, by the way, and the state of Illinois would get bailouts from President Biden. And that's what they're unfortunately banking on. None of that's going to happen because people like you, patriots like you, and all of your listeners out there are going to fight against that. And we're going to not just win this election, but as I've told you before, John, we've got to win big so we make it almost impossible for them to steal it afterward.
Define winning big on election night, Steve Cortes. What does that look like?
Well, bigger than last time. In other words, holding all the states we held last time, plus adding 3 or 4 or 5 new states. And I think, look, is that likely? I'll be the first to say, no, it's not likely. But is it doable? Yes, it's absolutely doable. It's not implausible that we can do that. Can we flip New Mexico? The way we are trending with Hispanics right now, latest Fox News poll. And Fox News polling generally isn't all that Trump favorable, but it shows us on a nationwide basis 41% among Hispanics. Can we flip New Mexico, Nevada, New Hampshire up in the Northeast? Can we flip Minnesota? I think it is entirely plausible that can happen. If we flip all of those states, right, then we're talking about, the electoral math count going way over 300, well north of the 270 we need. It makes it much more difficult. I'm not saying the Dems might not still try, but it makes it far, far more difficult for them to try to flip the election that way and to not flip it, to try to steal the election versus if it all hinges on one state, right? Like, let's say that it's close enough, for example, that Pennsylvania decides it all. And that's also not an implausible scenario, right? That could happen. Well, if that's the case, Pennsylvania has one of the worst governors in America. It's possible that we will see in Pennsylvania or another state like that with a Democrat governor, Democrat Secretary of State, that there would be some real chicanery going on, to put it mildly. Let's not get in that position. Let's make it where it's not one state, that would change the outcome. That's what I want to try to exhort people toward. Again, is it likely? Probably not likely, but is it possible? Heck yes, it is.
Wow. I tell you what, you guys are all over this because we were just talking to Steve Bannon earlier before you came on, Steve Cortes with us. Steve Cortes, Senior Strategic Advisor, Trump Pence 2020. And one of the things he said is in Pennsylvania, they had just extended the voting mail-in deadline to it can be received 3 days after the election, which would be November 6th. Now, what time November 6th? 5 o'clock, I guess midnight. But if they can extend it 3 days, they can extend it 10 days. There's no end to this in sight. So they'll just keep extending it and getting ballots and saying, oh, my God, every vote has to be counted. Every vote has to be counted until finally, a box with 50,000 shows up and it puts Biden over the top. Everybody understands that's going to be the scenario. That's why in Pennsylvania they went to the extension. Whoever heard of it to be received 3 days after at the post office? When are you mailing in your ballot? November 5th? I mean, that's insane.
It's ludicrous. It's why, by the way, as a campaign, we've been so active in litigating against these, active from a PR standpoint in arguing against all of these changes. And by the way, in a lot of states, we did prevent these kinds of changes, thank goodness, through litigation, through the federal litigation, through public pressure. We haven't been able to stop it in Pennsylvania. And look, this is a judge who said this, unfortunately. And, talk about legislating from the bench, right? A judge is not allowed to make this kind of decision, but they did in the state of Pennsylvania. And as I said, because they have a miserable liberal governor, we're certainly not going to see any pushback from the governor. Obviously, the opposite, right? Welcoming this. So we're going to do everything we can between now and Election Day to continue to fight against these rules. And again, my hope is let's work toward this. It's not an unreasonable goal. Let's work toward the fact where it doesn't just hinge on Pennsylvania, if that is still in doubt. Let's win additional states that we didn't win last time. Let's win Pennsylvania, but let's also win additional states. But you're right. The idea of, it's sort of like in soccer, and I don't watch soccer very much. I'm such an American football fan. But in soccer, how they have extra time at the end, right? And it's kind of ill-defined, at least from what I understand. The announcers often don't know. Only the ref on the field knows exactly how much extra time. It's sort of that notion of, well, the extra time is whatever the Democratic leaders of that state determine they need to get the number of votes.
Exactly. There's no clock. It's like you're in a football game. You're behind by 2 touchdowns, and you simply extend the clock until you can finally win.
Right.
In Michigan, they've now extended for 2 weeks. How can How can a ballot come in 2 weeks late? What could take 2 weeks in the mail system? This is mean that they're getting people to vote. They find out how many they're down, and they go and round people up on the 10th. On the 10th, a week later, they round them up and harvest the ballots and send them in 2 weeks later. The hell?
Right.
What? Who the hell ever heard of that?
John, this also brings up why, to tie it to the Supreme Court vacancy now, why it's so important. Again, what scenarios are possible, which ones are plausible. It's not at all implausible to project that if there are these kinds of battles in states like Pennsylvania and Michigan, which you've been mentioning, that matter for the electoral count, right? That could flip it from one way to the other. If we won, but we would lose, in other words, if those states were reversed, it is very possible, entirely possible, that this will quickly become an issue for the United States Supreme Court, as it did in 2000 with the Florida recount. And that is a critical reason why we need to fill this seat, and we need to fill it by Election Day. And the president, thankfully, has been very insistent on that. I hope and believe that the Senate is going to follow his lead on that regard and do their constitutional duty. But we need to have a 9-person Supreme Court at the ready if this scenario plays out, that we're talking about and warning about. And again, it could. I'm still hopeful we just win big. But if we don't and we win by a reasonably small margin, it's going to be critical for us to have that Ginsburg seat filled with a true jurist, with a constitutional originalist, and somebody who's not going to act as a brazen partisan from the Supreme Court.
Steve, we got 2 minutes. When is the president going to get this done? He went on Fox and Friends today and said Friday or Saturday. A lot of us think it ought to be Monday or Tuesday in order to get this done. I mean, he said his list is down to 5. The leader seems to be Amy Coney Barrett. She's my first choice, but there's certainly others. He said it's going to be a woman. Why wait till Friday or Saturday? Why not get this thing done and get moving?
Right. Honestly, I was watching that as well, so that was news to me. That he broke that to everybody at the same time because I was expecting that it was going to be imminent, meaning today, tomorrow. So I don't know the rationale for that. I can't speak to it yet because it just happened regarding Friday. But yes, look, my advice, obviously it's his call. He's the president. But my advice is sooner rather than later. The sooner we get on this process, the better. And we can get this done by Election Day. There's plenty of precedent for it happening this fast. Ruth Bader Ginsburg's own nomination was just about this quick. We've had much quicker. We've had much longer. But again, it can be done, absolutely. And the Senate needs to get to work. And again, part of the reason to connect it to the election is if we win this election, but we don't win it in a resounding way, it's very likely that it will be litigated. And we need to have a 9-person Supreme Court to solve that scenario, to solve that situation for the country. Not just for our campaign, for the entire country. We cannot have it undetermined. We cannot have the indecision last all the way into when the electors are supposed to vote, which is in December.
Steve Cortes, bottom line is we only got a minute here. Bottom line is very simple. We can't lose more than 3 Republicans before November 3rd, and then Pence can vacate the tie. 2 have already bailed. Collins, Maine. I'm done with her. Murkowski, Alaska. Everybody expected that. Right in Lisa. She thinks she's not vulnerable at any time after that. Right in victory over Joe Miller. So I understand that. We can only afford one more defection. Weak need. Grassley hasn't committed. Cory Gardner, Colorado, hasn't committed. Mitt Romney, Weasel, who the hell knows what he's going to do? What do you think?
Right. Well, listen, it's incumbent upon us meaning, the MAGA movement, the America First people, to keep the pressure up on all of these senators, right? And I think if we do that, I think we will keep them in line. I think a lot of these folks, they don't operate on principle, but if they feel enough pressure from the public, from their supporters, from their constituents, from their donors, then I think we can force them to do the right thing, even if they don't want to do the right thing. So I think it's incumbent on us, on you, John, on all of your listeners out there, on all the deplorables out there, to keep the pressure on those soft milquetoast senators that you're talking about.
John Fredericks Radio Network, Steve Cortes, Senior Strategic Advisor, Trump Pence 2020. Steve, thanks for being with us. I really appreciate it.